The words "dead weight" followed Captain Maria Santos wherever she went on Fort Campbell. Not spoken to her face, of course, military courtesy prevented that, but whispered in maintenance bays, muttered in mess halls, and typed in personnel reports that she wasn't supposed to see. "Santos is grounded again," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez told his crew as they prepped a Black Hawk for the morning patrol. "Third time this month." "What was it this time?" Corporal Jenkins asked, not looking up from the rotor inspection. "Refused to follow evacuation protocol during the simulation. Command says she's too emotional, makes decisions based on feelings instead of orders." Maria heard them from behind the hangar wall where she stood reviewing maintenance logs, the only flying-related duty she was still allowed to perform. 6 months ago, she'd been one of the most promising helicopter pilots in the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Today she was relegated to paperwork and equipment checks. The irony wasn't lost on her. She joined the Army to save lives, trained relentlessly to become a medevac pilot, and now she wasn't trusted to fly anything more dangerous than a supply run to the base commissary. "Santos." Major Thompson's voice cut through the morning air. "My office. Now." Maria straightened her uniform and walked across the tarmac, past the Black Hawks that other pilots got to fly. The UH-60 helicopters sat like sleeping predators, their rotors folded back, waiting for crews that didn't include her. Major Thompson didn't invite her to sit when she entered his office. He stood behind his desk, her personnel file open in front of him, his expression conveying the kind of disappointment that had become familiar. "The psychiatric evaluation came back," he said without preamble. "Dr. Martinez recommends extended grounding for emotional instability and failure to follow chain of command." Maria felt her heart sink, but kept her expression neutral. "Sir, with respect, I saved those civilians during the flood evacuation. The orders were to extract military personnel first," Thompson interrupted. "You disobeyed those orders to rescue a family of 4 from a rooftop, putting your crew and aircraft at risk. They would have died, sir. That wasn't your call to make." Thompson closed the file with finality. "You're reassigned to ground operations indefinitely. No flight status, no crew assignments. You'll be working logistics and maintenance support." Maria stood at attention, fighting back words that would only make her situation worse. "Yes, sir." Dismissed. As she left Thompson's office, Maria caught sight of the duty roster posted on the bulletin board. Today's missions included a routine supply run to Forward Operating Base Whiskey, a mountainous outpost 3 hours north of Fort Campbell. The crew assigned was Captain Rodriguez, Sergeant Williams, and Specialist Davis, all competent pilots and crew members she trained with. But looking at the weather report taped beside the roster, Maria felt a chill of concern. Severe thunderstorms were moving through the mountain region, with winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour and visibility dropping to near zero. It was exactly the kind of weather that made helicopter operations extremely dangerous. She walked to the meteorology office, hoping to get more detailed information about the storm system. Lieutenant Peterson, the base weather officer, looked up from his computer screens filled with satellite imagery and radar data. "Santos, what brings you to Weather Central?" "The storm system moving through Sector 7, she said, pointing to the radar display. "How severe are we talking?" Peterson's expression grew serious. "Worst I've seen in months. Rotating supercells, possible tornadoes, and winds that'll toss a Black Hawk around like a toy. I recommended postponing all flights in that area, but command says the supply run is critical." Maria studied the weather patterns, her mind automatically calculating flight paths and risk factors. The storm was massive, covering nearly the entire mountain region where FOB Whiskey was located. Any helicopter flying through that system would be in serious danger. "When's the next update?" she asked. "Every 30 minutes, but this storm isn't going anywhere soon. It's a slow-moving system that'll be sitting over those mountains for hours." Maria thanked Peterson and walked back toward the maintenance hangar, her mind racing. She'd flown through severe weather before, it was part of the job, but this storm looked different. More dangerous. The kind of weather that claimed aircraft and crews. An hour later, she was reviewing maintenance logs when the base alarm system activated. Not the general alarm, but the specific tone that meant aircraft emergency. Maria dropped her paperwork and ran toward the Flight Operations Center, where a crowd of personnel had gathered around the radio communications station. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Blackbird 7. We are going down." "Repeat, we are going down?" The transmission cut to static. Major Thompson was barking orders into his radio, trying to re-establish contact with the downed aircraft. Maria pushed closer to hear the communications. Blackbird 7, this is Campbell Tower. Please respond. Blackbird 7, do you copy? Nothing but static. Sir, the radio operator said, last known position was 15 miles northeast of FOB Whiskey, right in the heart of the storm system. Maria's blood ran cold. Blackbird 7 was the call sign for the supply run mission. Captain Rodriguez and his crew. The aircraft she'd been watching prepare for flight just hours earlier. What's the status of search and rescue? Thompson demanded. Sir, all available aircraft are grounded due to weather conditions. The storm system is too severe for safe flight operations. How long until the weather clears? Meteorology estimates 6 to 8 hours, sir. Thompson's face went pale. If the crew had survived the crash, they wouldn't last 6 to 8 hours in the mountains during a severe storm. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the isolated terrain made ground-based rescue impossible. Sir, Maria stepped forward, I volunteer to attempt a rescue mission. Thompson turned to her with disbelief. Santos, you're grounded. And even if you weren't, no one's flying in this weather. I've studied the storm patterns, sir. There's a brief window of opportunity, a gap in the system that could allow safe passage to the crash site. Absolutely not. I'm not losing another aircraft and crew on a suicide mission. Maria felt the familiar frustration rising, but this time it was different. This wasn't about her career or her reputation. 3 of her fellow soldiers were down in hostile weather, and she was the only one who had studied the storm system closely enough to identify a possible rescue route. Sir, with respect, I'm the most experienced mountain weather pilot on this base. I've flown through conditions like this before. And your emotional decision-making is exactly why you're grounded, Thompson replied sharply. The answer is no. Maria watched as precious minutes ticked by while Thompson coordinated with other bases, trying to find aircraft that could launch from outside the storm system. But she knew what he would discover. By the time any external rescue could reach the crash site, it would be too late. She made her decision. 20 minutes later, Maria stood in the maintenance hangar beside Black Hawk tail number 476, one of the aircraft she'd been assigned to inspect. The maintenance crew had gone to lunch, leaving the hangar temporarily empty. The helicopter was fully fueled and equipped for mountain operations, external fuel tanks, mountain rescue equipment, and advanced navigation systems. Maria had spent 6 months studying every bolt, wire, and component of these aircraft. She knew this particular Black Hawk better than some pilots knew their own cars. More importantly, she knew it was mechanically sound and ready for flight. I'm sorry, she whispered to the empty hangar, but they're going to die if someone doesn't try. She completed the pre-flight inspection in record time, her hands moving with practiced efficiency across the aircraft systems. Everything checked out perfectly. The weather update on her tablet showed the brief gap in the storm system she'd identified, a narrow corridor of less severe weather that would allow passage to the crash site. The window would only last 30 minutes. After that, the storm would close the gap completely. Maria climbed into the pilot's seat and began the startup sequence. The Black Hawk's twin engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, rotor blades beginning their slow rotation. She put on her helmet and adjusted the radio to the emergency frequency. Campbell Tower, this is Black Hawk 476 requesting immediate takeoff clearance for search and rescue mission. The response was immediate and sharp. Black Hawk 476, you are not authorized for flight operations. Return to hangar immediately. Tower, I have visual on the weather gap. This is our only chance to reach the survivors. Santos, this is Major Thompson. You are directly violating orders. Land that aircraft immediately or face court-martial. Maria looked at the weather radar display on her console. The gap was already beginning to narrow. In 15 minutes it would be too small for safe passage. Major, 3 of our people are dying on that mountain. I can reach them, but only if I go now. Santos, do not do this. You're throwing away your career. My career's already over, sir. But theirs don't have to be. Maria pulled pitch and lifted off from the hangar, banking immediately toward the mountains. Behind her, she could hear Thompson's voice on the radio, ordering other aircraft to intercept her. But she knew that in this weather she was the only pilot crazy enough to attempt flight. The Black Hawk climbed rapidly through the turbulent air, fighting crosswinds that pushed the aircraft sideways despite Maria's corrections. She flew low and fast, using the terrain to shield herself from the worst of the wind while navigating through valleys shrouded in storm clouds. Campbell Tower, this is Santos. I'm entering the storm system now. If I don't make it back, tell my family I died doing what I trained for. The radio crackled with Thompson's voice, but his words were lost in the static as Maria flew into the heart of the storm. What happened next would be discussed in military aviation circles for years to come. Maria Santos, flying a single Black Hawk helicopter through weather conditions that had grounded every other aircraft in the region, began a rescue mission that seemed impossible from the start. The storm hit her aircraft like a physical blow, winds gusting up to 70 miles per hour that threatened to flip the helicopter inverted. Rain hammered the windscreen so hard that visibility dropped to mere feet. Lightning flashed continuously, creating a strobing effect that made instrument reading nearly impossible. But Maria had something that the other pilots lacked. She had studied this specific storm system for hours, memorizing its patterns and identifying the pockets of less turbulent air that existed within the chaos. She flew by instinct and experience, using every trick she'd learned in 6 years of mountain flying. 15 minutes into the flight, she spotted the gap in the weather that would allow her to reach the crash site. It was exactly where her calculations had predicted, but it was smaller than she'd hoped, a narrow corridor of merely severe weather surrounded by conditions that would destroy any aircraft. "This is it," she muttered, banking the Black Hawk into the gap. The relief was immediate but temporary. The winds dropped from catastrophic to merely dangerous, and visibility improved enough to see the mountain peaks that surrounded her. Using her GPS and terrain-following radar, Maria navigated through the valleys toward the last known position of Blackbird 7. She found the wreckage on a steep mountainside, the Black Hawk's tail boom separated from the fuselage, rotor blades scattered across the rocky terrain. But through the wreckage she could see movement. Someone was alive. Landing on the steep, rocky terrain would be impossible, but Maria had trained for this scenario. She brought her Black Hawk into a hover just above the crash site, fighting the mountain winds that tried to slam her aircraft into the rocks. Through her side window she could see Captain Rodriguez waving from beside the wreckage. He was helping Sergeant Williams, who appeared to be injured, while Specialist Davis worked to signal the rescue aircraft. All three were alive, but they were hypothermic and wouldn't survive much longer in the storm. Maria activated the external rescue hoist and lowered the penetrator, a specialized device designed to extract personnel from difficult terrain. The wind made the operation incredibly dangerous, the hoist cable swinging wildly as she fought to maintain position. One by one she pulled the survivors up into her aircraft. Rodriguez came first, then the injured Williams and finally Davis. Each extraction took precious minutes while the storm raged around them, but Maria held the Black Hawk steady through pure determination and skill. "We're all aboard," Rodriguez shouted over the noise of the engines and storm. "Let's get out of here." But as Maria began to climb away from the crash site, her aircraft shuddered and alarms began blaring. The severe weather and demanding flight conditions had pushed the Black Hawk beyond its limits. She was losing engine power and hydraulic pressure. The helicopter was failing. "We're not going to make it back," she announced calmly. "I'm going to try to reach FOB Whiskey." The forward operating base was closer than Fort Campbell, but it meant flying deeper into the storm system instead of trying to escape it. With a failing aircraft and 3 injured passengers, it was their only chance. Maria coaxed every bit of performance from the dying Black Hawk, nursing it through the mountains as systems continued to fail around her. The flight that should have taken 20 minutes stretched into an hour as she was forced to fly slower and lower, avoiding the worst of the weather while fighting to keep the helicopter airborne. When FOB Whiskey finally appeared through the storm clouds, it looked like a tiny island of salvation in an ocean of chaos. Maria lined up for an emergency approach, auto-rotating the helicopter down through the turbulent air with engines that were barely running. The landing was more controlled crash than touchdown, but the Black Hawk settled onto the FOB's landing pad with all 4 survivors still alive. As the rotor blades wound down, Maria slumped forward in her seat, emotionally and physically exhausted from the most demanding flight of her career. An hour later, as the storm began to clear and rescue helicopters arrived from Fort Campbell, Maria found herself sitting in the FOB's communication center, waiting for what she knew would be the end of her military career. Major Thompson's voice crackled through the radio with orders for her immediate arrest upon return to base. But then another voice joined the conversation. Colonel Martinez, the base commander, who had been monitoring the situation from his office. "Major Thompson," Martinez said, his voice carrying the authority of senior command, "are you seriously planning to court-martial the pilot who just saved 3 of our people?" "Sir, she directly violated orders and stole military property. She saved 3 lives in weather conditions that grounded every other aircraft on the base," Martinez interrupted. "Captain Santos, are you on this frequency?" "Yes, sir," Maria replied. "Outstanding work, Captain. When you return to Campbell, report to my office for debriefing. 3 days later, Maria stood in Colonel Martinez's office, but the meeting wasn't what she'd expected. Instead of facing charges, she found herself being offered a new assignment, flight instructor for the Army's high-risk rescue operations school. The military needs pilots who can think beyond the rulebook, Martinez explained. What you did was technically insubordination, but it was also exactly the kind of initiative that saves lives in combat situations. Major Thompson, who was also present, looked uncomfortable but nodded his agreement. The psychiatric evaluation has been amended, he said. Dr. Martinez now recommends you for advanced rescue operations training. Sir, Maria asked, what about the dead weight designation? Martinez smiled. I think we can safely say that's no longer applicable. Captain Rodriguez specifically requested that you be assigned as his permanent rescue pilot. Seems he's impressed with your flying abilities. 6 months later, Captain Maria Santos stood before a new group of pilot trainees, teaching them the advanced techniques of high-risk rescue operations. On her uniform, she wore the wings of a Master Army aviator and the ribbon of the Distinguished Flying Cross. Flying isn't just about following orders, she told her students. Sometimes the situation requires you to make decisions that go beyond the rulebook. The key is knowing when to follow procedures and when to trust your training and instincts. She looked out the window at the Black Hawks on the flight line, where new crews were preparing for their own challenging missions. They used to call me dead weight, she continued, because I made decisions based on what I thought was right instead of what was convenient. But sometimes being willing to carry that weight, to take responsibility for the lives of others, is exactly what makes you valuable. The story of Maria Santos became legend in military aviation circles. The pilot who had been grounded for emotional decision-making had proven that sometimes emotions, compassion, determination, and the refusal to abandon fellow soldiers were exactly what the situation required. They had called her dead weight until the day she piloted a Black Hawk through impossible weather and saved everyone. After that, they called her exactly what she was, a hero.